Hey, I'm Aaron. I'm an atheist.
And I'm Steven. I'm a Christian.
This is Out of the Echo,
where two brothers share one conversation about God, the Bible, and Christianity.
So this week, Rainn Wilson, Dwight from The Office, was really convincing me to rethink spirituality. And so I wanted to come on here and talk to you about that, Steven. Did you happen to get to watch the video where Rainn Wilson talks with Rhett and Link?
Yes. So I believe it's called the SoulBoom podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found it really interesting how someone who is kind of a Christian, but not really a Christian, is trying to convince former Christians to be a Christian. But one thing I was curious what you thought, which position do you feel is like better or worse? Because Rainn Wilson has this view that he loves the teaching of Jesus, and that's what he really focuses on is the teaching. But he actually isn't worried about the resurrection of Jesus. But then you also have these ex-Christians that aren't believing at all. Which one would you prefer?
Between someone who just says, I'm not a Christian versus someone who's like, well, I might consider myself a Christian, but I don't believe in the resurrection.
Correct.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting conversation, and it was really odd for Rainn Wilson to be saying, I'm going to convince you guys to be Christians again, basically. Yeah. But I mean, I was very frustrated by a lot of what was said, which is going to happen whenever you're listening to people who don't share the same views that you do. But yeah, the fact that he was wanting to say, well, the resurrection is actually the least important thing in the Bible. I'm like, well, you can say that, and it's probably because you're coming to the Bible with certain assumptions. The Bible on its own terms would actually say that the resurrection is what gives the rest of the Bible meaning and hope. So for me, it was like, yeah, that sounds good. And I could see how if I wasn't a Christian, then I would probably be drawn to something that says, well, you can take all the things that you like from the Bible, and then anything that you don't believe, you can just throw that away. But I just don't think that it's a very practical and a very authentic Christianity. I could see, though, also how Rhett and Link are now becoming a little bit more drawn to that, because they're kind of, you can see where Rhett is kind of interested in engaging in sort of a liberal version of Christianity. Link is like, I prayed for the first time in however many years. And so they're kind of drawn to a sort of spirituality, but they absolutely reject the core tenets of at least what I believe Christianity is. And I think that that's extremely defensible from the from the Bible. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see where they are. How did this, because I know this was a really helpful conversation for you. Like, what are some of the things that you picked up that you were like, oh, that's really interesting, and I'm really connecting with that?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have thought of a Christian as someone who just values the teaching of Jesus. So it was interesting. In some ways, I think you and I have the same view on this, that like we probably wouldn't necessarily consider Rainn Wilson to be a Christian, but it's interesting to think that you don't have to view things so black and white. And so it was interesting for me to just step back and think, okay, I'm still viewing the Bible through the lens of which I reject. But what if I do take a different approach to it? How could I actually look at the Bible now? Is there any way that I can view it in a way that I can glean truth from it? Because right now, I really struggle to glean truth from it. But there's just good parables. I don't have to believe that there were actually 3 little pigs, and a wolf to actually glean some truth from a parable. You know what I mean? It made me think, like, how important is religion just in a human experience? And I think that's something I've kind of been discrediting, is maybe us humans are just built to have some kind of religion incorporated in our lives. And that's kind of Rainn Wilson's take on this. Now,
Mhm.
whenever I say that, what are some thoughts that you have about that?
Yeah, there's a couple different thoughts. One is, so I'll just probe a little bit more. When you say we're built, like, are you still coming from the perspective that I think you had pretty early on in your deconversion, which is religion has been useful from sort of an evolutionary perspective? Is that still kind of like, are you just basically saying, like, well, maybe we haven't outgrown that? Or are you saying, actually, no, I think we might be built by something or someone and created with this kind of religious desire or need?
Yeah, I guess I'm viewing religion as a utility, not necessarily the truth, if that makes sense. I think there's something
Mm-hmm.
about having hope outside of ourselves that is just incredibly important. And even in within my atheism, I still kind of have some knowledge, I guess, knowing that things just tend to work out. I don't necessarily know what to attribute it to, but I do understand things just tend to work out, and it helps me clear out some anxiety or worrying about things, and especially in a time where I'm not praying and seeking something outside of myself, it really does help me to just kind of have some faith that things just tend to work out. So that's why I think that religion does play a good role within us, even though I hate to say it, like, sometimes religion has caused so many bad things. I think on an individual level, it can have a very good impact.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because it's like, on the one hand, I appreciate the optimism of what you're talking about, and I appreciate the appreciation of what I believe. So it's
Mm,
like, at least if an atheist says, "Oh, I can see the utility of religion," then we can at least share the beliefs that, like, I shouldn't stop what I believe. You just don't believe that it's true.
mm,
Does that
right.
make sense? Like,
It
we both
does.
see the benefit and the good in it. I think what is hard for me as a Christian, there are a couple different things that come to mind. One is sort of the decoupling of truth from religion and faith.
Hmm.
So it's basically saying, like, well, you can believe this thing that's false as long as it's useful to you.
Right.
And how does that strike you, that it's like, well, it doesn't matter if it's true, it just matters like what impact it has on how you get by in this crazy world until you go back 6 feet under?
Yeah. No, I totally understand what you're saying, and yeah, I don't know if dismissive is the right word to say, like, "Hey, I'm really glad you believe this. I think it's, totally untrue, but I'm really happy for you." That's not exactly what you want to hear whenever you put in all your faith into something. So it doesn't really matter what's happening. If you go to a venue to be entertained, it doesn't really matter if a singer's up there or a magician or whatever. If you go to a place and your goal is to be entertained, that's what matters at the end of the day. And so that's where I'm coming across with religion, that if you're going to a place of worship and you're worshiping a deity and it's fulfilling a need that you have in your life, that that at the end of the day is what matters. Um, and there's a big part of me that wishes that I could take a part of that, but I have so much trouble partaking in religion, even though I almost have a desire to. I just can't take it serious. And that's what kind of awakened in this conversation, is realizing I do have a desire for it. And there is a part of me that longs to be a part of religion. I just can't get past this hurdle from my past belief.
Yeah. So, I mean, just going back to your original question, I think there's a part of me that definitely says, like, well, I'd rather you be in a place where you're more open to faith and spirituality than to be like hardened and
Mm,
completely
yeah.
um completely against those things, and to where it's like we can't even have conversations. Like, certainly I'd prefer that option.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's helpful that you're not mistaking that for Christianity.
Mm,
Like, that we're on the same page about, like, you wouldn't you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, and if you did, you'd add caveats like Richard Dawkins, I'm a cultural Christian.
Mm,
Instead of saying, or you might say like I'm a Christian in that I appreciate the teachings of Jesus. There's a lot of really helpful things in the Bible, but I am not a committed person to following Jesus or to following what the Bible teaches. Would
hmm.
that be right?
Yeah, that's funny that you say that because I would have said the opposite as a Christian. And I was thinking about this. I tapped back into my Christian brain. I would have actually preferred to talk to someone who outright rejected Christianity because I wanted to go in and convince them otherwise. I wanted to evangelize to them because at least they didn't think that they believed. So then I could make them
Yeah.
believe, you know.
Well, and that's where I'm making the distinction though, because I think where you are is different from the person who you can pretty much tell that they're not a Christian, but they're not actually following Jesus, but they claim to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
and they might say something like, "Yeah, I mean, I love Jesus, but I can't stand the church." And so you'd want like what? Well, you can't really have one without the other. Um, or they might, yeah. I mean, like it's different from saying I appreciate these things. If you really want to know what I believe, I don't believe in God. Like you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
transparent about that, and so
Right.
it is helpful to say like, okay, but we both appreciate Jesus. Like we can at least share um, the positive and common view of some of these things, which is different, I think, from the person who's just fooling themselves and trying to fool the people around them.
Have you looked into the Baha'i? I want to. I try to
But
pronounce it right. The Baha'i religion that Rainn Wilson was talking about that is kind of at the core of his belief.
yeah, no, I don't know much about it.
Hmm. From what I understand, they can glean truth from pretty much all religions, and so that's why he can look into the Quran or the Bible and he can still glean truth from it, even though he doesn't have to give all of his faith to that. But what do you think about when someone tries to glean truth from all religions like that? Do you think there's wisdom in it, or do you think that's what more scary?
Well, the first thing is that I think about is that if all truth is God's truth, like if we're saying that there is truth, then there could definitely be true things that you could learn from a religion that's not Christianity. Um, in fact, I would say there like what the idea of what the Baha'i faith is probably coming from is like, oh, I can like see something in the Quran, see something in any other ancient or religious text, and go, oh, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like there's wisdom there. I think what Christianity would say though is that like we shouldn't put them on equal footing,
Mm,
um, and we shouldn't treat them as all being from God, even if they contain truth that has come from people who are observing truth. Um, and so what I see there, and so I've been reading through the Bible, and recently just finished the book of Judges, and so that's what's coming to my mind right now is. By the way, Judges is a really hard read. So there's a lot of really violent and horrible things that happen in the book of Judges. But that's because the point of the book of Judges is that there was a period of time where um, before Israel had a king, where it says everybody did what was right in their own eyes. So Judges is mainly showing how the people of Israel desperately needed a king, and also that they were not following what God had told them to do. And there's this guy who at one point he basically decides he's going to do his own thing religiously, and then he and I forget all the details of it, but I do remember this part where he hires a Levite. Now, do you know who the Levites were?
no.
So the tribe of Levi was specifically, it's like Aaron. Moses, like they came from
Gotcha.
them, and they
Hmm.
were the tribe of priests. So this guy hires his own Levite to be his personal priest, and basically because he's like, now God will bless me, because even though he's like kind of doing his own thing, he's like, well, I hired a Levite to do that. And it's just this like really backwards, like there's a lot of that happens in Judges where people just decide, well, I'll take a little bit of what the Bible says and then I'll
Hmm.
basically use it to do whatever I want to do, and it always goes really poorly. And so that's just what comes to my mind is like, if we're going to say, well, I'm going to take from each religion but I'm not going to take the whole thing, well then who's the God in that scenario? Who's the actual religious text in that scenario? It's me, because I'm the one who's deciding what to take and what to leave out.
Hmm.
So you can do that and you can probably come up with a lot of really good things, but at the end of the day what you're saying is like, I am the ultimate standard of wisdom. It's not any particular God that I am going to with some sort of objective wisdom or objective morality or whatever we might be talking about. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. Oh, it does. Because that's one thing that I'm really struggling with is like, so now being on in the camp of I don't believe the Bible in its entirety. I have trouble getting anything from the Bible. I have trouble even
Mm-hmm.
getting to Rainn Wilson's like gleaming truth, even though he doesn't accept all of it. Um, and so I almost feel like a alcoholic that I can't even partake in any of it because because of my upbringing. I guess I'm a recovering religious aholic. That's why I'm so jealous that he can be spiritual without committing everything to it, because I do still have that same view of kind of an all or nothing approach to the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of are thinking the same thing, but we're just in two different camps on it.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, so one thing that I'm seeing is that Rainn Wilson doesn't come from a Christian background. So he's
Right.
coming to Christianity without any sort of historical trauma or bad feelings. Like everything that he does, he's kind of entering in to take the good things and then back out of it.
Right.
Whereas Rhett and Link, much more like you, they're like, well, yeah, but there's a version of Christianity that you're talking about, Rain, and then there's the version of Christianity that they came out of, which is much closer
Hmm.
to what I believe.
Right.
Not everything that they said is what I would believe, but they came from a conservative evangelical um, Christianity, which is where you came out of as well.
Hmm.
So, what are some of the things that you're like, well, I can't go there, and therefore the whole thing I have to say I can't trust because I'm all or nothing.
Yeah. I can't believe God is good is the biggest one. The Bible talks about that. uh, that um, I have trouble really pointing at like one verse. It's more of like the concepts that I was taught, even just like the original sin or hell.
So you would say that the idea of God is good, but the world is how it is, people suffer, those kind of things. Um, the fact that some people would go to hell, a lot of people, original sin. So what is the concern that you have with original sin?
It's tied in with that God would be good. I don't like that humans are blamed for the condition that the world is in. That if God is all knowing and all powerful, that he couldn't have figured out a way to have us on the world and there not be suffering. Um, so that's where I'm coming from. And the idea of original sin basically being like, oh no, God had the perfect plan. Everything was going to be great. And then humans came along and messed it up. I was like, well, who made the humans?
Okay, I see. And I can definitely see where, uh, because I think the whole Bible holds together so well, a lot of a lot of the harder parts, like what I just talked about with Judges, a lot of the harder parts
Hmm.
to read, like you kind of have to keep this framework of where the Bible's coming from and where the Bible's going. And I think it, I mean, by the way, I think it holds together remarkably as I read through it. But it is tough, and it is like challenging where I'll read something and I'll go, I need to think about that one. I need
Right.
to take a minute. And if you don't have that starting place of saying like, okay, I'm going to trust that this is God's word. I'm going to trust that there is an answer. Usually that's what propels me to go, okay, let me see how this fits within the Christian faith, and how I should understand it.
Yeah, now, and there have been verses that I've specifically looked towards, and you've done the research and you've found answers. And so, yes, there are
Mm.
definitely times that things in the Bible can seem to be detrimental or problematic, and there actually could be a legitimate solution to that problem.
Yeah. We just haven't chipped away at all of them to to your liking. Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, I'm having listened to that podcast, I was like, I'm a little bit frustrated by it, but I also I feel like we're in a strange time in our country, at least in our culture, where we had this sort of new atheism at one point, and
Hmm.
it was like the atheists were absolutely God is terrible for the world, and even those even some of those people are at least saying, like, even though they're acting like they were saying the same thing all along, but they're like, no, it's got a lot of good influences on the culture because I don't want to go this other direction.
Hmm.
um, and then we came to this place that was still pretty anti Christian, more open to religion. I feel like we're in a weird season of people are much more open and positive toward Christianity, in this way that we're talking about. That there's like good
Mm,
things in the
yes.
Bible, but
Hmm.
there's still that like, okay, but at the end of the day, the Bible has a lot of good things, but the most important things are centered on the question of who is Jesus. Um, and so I'm I'm kind of in this strange place of going, I'm frustrated that not everybody believes what I believe, but
Hmm.
I'm not I'm not really supposed to expect that they would. And I am at least happy that we can have more conversations, with people that are in that camp than we could with a Richard Dawkins type, who would say that what I believe is actually harmful and violent toward people.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's tough. Like, so if we do consider everything interwoven, then really all it means is there's just got to be one thing that you disagree with, and then you almost just have to toss everything out. At least by what you and I are saying, that our view of the Bible. But if you have a more lighthearted view of the Bible, it's going to be more malleable, and you're going to be able to withstand criticisms a lot easier through that. So if you really struggle with, hey, I got friends and I want to still accept them, but I also still want to go to heaven, what do I do? That doesn't have to be as detrimental as the way that we would view the Bible.
The one pushback I'd give to that is that I don't think that you can see all of it as tied together the same way. Um,
Mm,
so there's a difference between saying, Rainn Wilson saying the resurrection is like the least important thing.
hmm.
Basically saying, I don't believe that, but it's not important. Um, that I think is core and central. And I mean, the goodness of God would be an example as
Yeah, I would
well.
agree with you
So
on that. Yeah.
yeah, but then, um, should we should we spank our children or not? Like, is that a requirement of the Bible? Okay, we can have strong disagreements on that, but is that something that everything else falls apart? And homosexuality is an interesting one because I think part of it is, okay, there seems to be a very clear teaching on the morality of this subject, but there's also the side of it, of the practical side of how do I love the people I love? How do I show my love to them? How do I have a friendship with them? Should I have a friendship with them? Those kind of questions, I think, are not specifically and clearly addressed in the scripture to the point where we can't disagree on them. So
Mm-hmm.
when you say, like, well, I want to love these people, but I also want to go to heaven, like, I would say, you absolutely can. You
Mm-hmm.
just, there's questions of, like, what does that look like? How does it play out, that people may disagree on? Um, but if you're willing to speak the truth in love, then you can say, like, hey, I don't agree with you on this, lifestyle, but I also love you, and I would like to continue to have a relationship with you and care about you. um, and so we consider, like, the wording that's used in the Christian circles is theological triage. So it's the idea of, like, I'm prioritizing what things do I believe are the most important, and that do, like, all the Bible holds together on. And that would be things like original sin, or at least parts of what original sin, like, you may say there's different aspects of how it plays out or whatever, or the resurrection. But then it's like, if it's like we disagree on whether infants can be baptized or not, well, we may not be able to go to church together because the church has to decide one way or another on that issue. But we can say that we can affirm each other as believers still. And there's different levels, I think, of how that can work, because no two, well, maybe not no two Christians are going to agree on everything, but you're not going to get a church of 100 people where everybody just down the line agrees on everything, unless it's a pretty um, closed church that requires you upon entry to sign off on all the different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some churches do. So.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for sure. So I do think that what you're saying depends on what we're talking about, as to, like, does the whole Bible, do you have to take the whole Bible um, as one package, where if you take this one thing out, it all falls together? Well, I think it's mainly the central pieces of it. But if you're talking about something where uh, there are disagreements about the age of the earth, or something about Joshua 10 with the sun standing still, and how did that work? Like, those are not
Mm-hmm.
things where the whole Bible holds together on your interpretation of it.
There were two things I was curious if you could relate to at all. One was Rainn Wilson saying that atheism just didn't work for him, and how hard Link made it sound to pray for the first time in over 10 years.
Yeah. So Rain talking about atheism not working for him is interesting. Somebody who's basically saying, I tried this on for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that that wasn't who I am. Um, I think that that's something that, in some ways, it's like dating religions, kind of kind of idea of, like, well, I'll continue to get together with you as a Christian, though. Um, like, I would never try on a different religion at this
Mm-hmm.
point, where I'm like, well, that would be like a married man going off and dating, other women. And it's not like, I don't think of it as like I'm closed minded, as much as, though I'm fine with if someone wants to call me that, but it's that, like, I believe that I have a real relationship with God, and even if there are times when I struggle or doubt or whatever, like, I'm following him and trusting in him. And so I can't totally relate to what Rain is saying in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
like, trying it on and it not fitting, but I can also see how that would work if I was in a sort of a searching and going, like, all right, I don't know what I believe. Like, let's try some things on. Let's
Mm-hmm.
see.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, like, I almost feel like that's where I'm at. Not that atheism just isn't working for me, but realizing that you almost need something outside of yourself, and that
Mm,
just a naturalistic viewpoint is possible to hold, but it's difficult. It's difficult to feel like the world's burdens are on you and everything is left up to us to handle. So whenever you said that, I got it. And I'm kind of like Link, that I haven't prayed in years, and I almost get stressed whenever I'm hanging around religious people and we're about to eat. I'm like, please don't ask me to pray, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to have an awkward conversation right before dinner, and I don't want to like try and stumble my way through it.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. I related more to that, and I think one is because sometimes prayer is awkward. For I think everybody has had those experiences. But I could also imagine where if I were, and hope this never happens, in Link's shoes, where it's like I'm not practicing my faith like that. I feel like that would still be a habit. And
Mm.
one of the things I think about is my mother-in-law. We were in an escape room, and like the time was really like crunching down on us, and she's like, I feel like we should pray, you guys. And it's like, I mean, it is a game, like, but she felt anxious, and like
Uh-huh.
that's what we do, when we're
Yeah.
anxious, is we take that to God. um and I mean, to be honest, I relate to it, because I have to remind myself, if I'm like watching sports or something and starting to get angry or anxious, that I'm like, okay, Lord, help me to deal with whatever happens. Certainly, I hope that the Razorbacks win, but help me to
Mm-hmm.
be the kind of person who can deal with whatever the outcome is. So I can definitely understand all kinds of different feelings people might have about prayer, and also some awkwardness with it.
So I hope this makes sense, though. Like, I think there's a reason why people, when they deconstruct, get kind of a hard heart or bitterness towards their old belief, because it takes a lot to actually step away from it. Because,
Mm,
kind of like what you're saying, it's hard to give up prayer. Like that time pressure that she felt in the escape room, and those negative feelings during the sports games, that's constant. You got no one to
yeah.
turn to. Like that's just on you, not 24/7. Outside of therapy,
Hmm.
you got nothing, you know? So, um, so yeah, like that's why it takes a lot for you to step away from something that is working. I mean, it has a positive effect on your life until it doesn't. And then you just want to get rid of all of it.
Yeah, I can understand that. And especially like once you've gotten to the point where you're saying that I'm not this anymore, to have those instincts, and then to go like, this isn't my identity though. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do this. Like at that point, I could imagine that it's an inner turmoil that you must experience.
And it's an inner turmoil that having the desire to pray, but just kind of like, but to what? Like I mean, I feel like I still somewhat have a desire to pray, still have a desire to put my burdens on something, but it just feels so disingenuous, or I just can't fully. It almost feels like trying to tickle yourself. Like you just can't break that mental hurdle. you know?
Yeah, well, there's probably way more people who have watched or listened to that podcast than this one, but we hope that you enjoyed our conversation about it, and especially um, how it's had an impact on you. So if you haven't checked it out, if you're a Christian, I'll just tell you. Actually, probably people of all faiths are going to be annoyed by different aspects of it. So can be equally stressful for most of you,
Mhm.
but you
Well,
can check
I
it out.
wasn't annoyed at all, Stephen. So maybe that's a
Oh.
you problem. I don't know.
No, he was reading some of the comments, so I knew that there were some live listeners who were struggling with it.
All right. Well, it was good talking to you.
Yep,
So,
you too.